Hey guys, Coach Chris here, back with another video. First time in a long time. Haven't been posting many videos lately, but I have been working hard on my chess, and I actually have a tournament coming up on Saturday, which I'm really excited about. And as I'm getting ready for that tournament, I played a pretty interesting training game today that I wanted to show you guys. So I was playing the black pieces against a guy who is now 19, 18. Maybe that's what he was at the time. But we were pretty similarly rated, both 1900. And it's a 15-10 game on chess.com. So it starts off with a French defense. And then white goes for the Tarrasch. And against both knight d2 and knight c3, I've been playing d takes e4 lately and going for the Fort Knox variation, getting that bishop into play immediately, not being stuck with the traditional passive French bishop. So knight f3, bishop c6, now that bishop is already very active, attacking the knight on e4. White defends the knight, and I played knight d7, taking the e5 square under control so that white can't harass my bishop on c6. White castles, and now I develop the other knight. Now we've got two attackers on e4. And in this game, white played not very ambitiously. Queen e2, just supporting the knight. I have less space, so trades are desirable, so I traded twice on e4, and now just simply c6. Very sturdy pawns here on e6 and c6. White does have a little bit more space, a little bit faster development, but I plan on catching up in development very quickly, and then eventually trying to get in the c5 pawn break and start to fight for more central control. So bishop f4 for my opponent, and now knight f6 with the tempo on the queen. Queen retreats, and now bishop d6 attacking that unprotected bishop on f4. And again, white was not feeling very ambitious today and played bishop takes d6, which just helped me develop the queen to a very nice square. c3 from my opponent. Again, not very ambitious, but that d pawn is on an open file, and so I guess white just wanted to overprotect it. Knight castle, and now c5 is already good to go, but I didn't want to open up the position without first getting my rooks involved. So first I brought the f rook to d8, and then the a rook to c8. So now I really am ready to play c5, and queen c2 does not do anything to stop that, so c5 definitely now that the rooks are centralized. White took, which again surprised me. I decided to take with the rook so that when white challenges my queen on the open file, I'm able to triple and dominate the d file. White captured, I recaptured with the queen, still maintaining control of the d file, also hitting the pawn on a2. White played c4, hitting my queen. I went to c5. And here, white challenges for the d file, and I thought about it for about a minute or so, and then captured. White recaptured. Now you can't take the c pawn yet, because then you get back ranked, so h6, creating a flight square for the king. Queen d3, protecting the pawn on c4. And now here, I couldn't decide between a6 and a5. In hindsight, a5 is probably better, trying to slow down white's pawn instead of trying to exchange them, which is what I went for. Because after takes, there is at least some danger that white will create a pass pawn that is very far away from my king. So something I need to at least be mindful of. White tries to trade queens. White would really love to bring his knight to d4, hitting my pawn, and again trying to get closer to creating a passer on the queen side. I played queen to c2 instead, keeping the queens on for a moment, and here my opponent played queen to d2 and offered a draw in this position. But with more than double time on the clock, I felt like, and based on my opponent's play earlier in the game, I felt like white was very uncomfortable in this position, and I wanted to go for more. Also, my in-game play has been atrocious lately, so I really wanted to work on that and try to get better. And so here, I declined the draw, and I traded the queens, thinking that now in this position, with a knight on d2, and not on d4 after the queen trade in this version, that this would be a little bit better for me because it takes the white knight longer to get to a dangerous square. So after the queens come off, I have to centralize my king, so I start moving the king over. White played knight to b1. I was worried at the time about knight f3, d4, and then what do I do about this pawn? One of the things you can do here is play knight to d5, and then once the pawn is attacked, then you can push it, as the engine points out as I was analyzing the game earlier. So I'm not just, with the queen trade, I didn't just blunder into a lost endgame. Engine says the position is completely equal. So anyway, start to centralize the king. Here, white played knight to b1 with the idea of knight c3 and trying to hit that pawn. Now is a great time for knight d5, taking that c3 square under control. And then if white were to play knight c3, then after takes, pawn recaptures, those pawns would be split up and nicely stopped by my one pawn. My king can come over and I'm completely safe. So knight d5, and white starts to centralize his king. King e7, still getting those pawns, getting the king closer to the center and to those queenside pawns. And white finally creates a passer, but my king is pretty close to it and actually just captures it. And so now I've got an enormous time advantage, 4-on-3 with knights on the board. Still objectively a draw, but I really wanted to keep pressing and try to grind down a win. So knight e4, king b4. Just got to be careful of knight forks. So for example, if king b5 there, then knight d6 would be an unpleasant fork. So king b4, knight d6 hitting the f-pawn. I moved it forward, and now knight e8 hitting the g7 pawn. And here g6 I think was ever so slightly more accurate, but g5 is still fine. Knight g7, now hitting the e6 pawn, and knight f4 check defending it. And after king f3, white plans to kick my knight and win the e6 pawn, but whenever he does that, then the h3 pawn will hang. So I felt okay with that trade. And I really need to get my king back involved in the action, and so I can't really avoid it at this point. So g3 hitting the knight, I take the pawn on h3, white takes the pawn on e6, and again I try to centralize my king, this time with tempo. White throws in a check on c7, but now the knight's kind of out of play. King e5, and white tries to bring the knight back to a useful square. I went with h5, trying to get these pawns rolling, and also to get my knight protected back in the game. White attacks it, I defend it. f3 is a clever move from my opponent. And now the engine says, like, hey look, you're never winning, so just give up this knight if you can get these pawns off the board. But I wanted to maintain winning chances, and so just f5, trying to keep some pawns on the board to try to preserve winning chances. Knight c3, and I'm trying to bring my king in with tempo when I can. White gives a check on b5, but now my king's getting in. And here, white takes the pawn, I recapture, and knight d6 was a move I hadn't seen or appreciated, I think, a few moves before this, but I'm able to push the pawn to a protected square, and after takes, white just needs to sacrifice this knight for this pawn to get a draw. And again, completely equal, but obviously I can't lose this position. It's impossible. And so why not just keep grinding and keep trying to play for a win? This is exactly the type of chess I love, by the way. Playing for two results, removing any losing chances first, and then just doing your best to try to grind out a win. And again, given the time situation, here I've got a little less than 3 minutes. My opponent has 26 seconds, basically living off the 10-second increment in this game. I thought, why not go for it? So knight c4, trying to bring the knight around. I'm also trying to get my knight into a useful square, trying to get into e4 when allowed. I don't want to trade off the knight in a situation where I have to bring my king over, and then white gets to step up. And even though I can protect the queen, that's a very easy draw for my opponent. So can't trade off the knights yet. Knight d6, I throw in a check, and I'm just trying to maneuver into a situation where I'm able to make some progress using all three of my pieces, trying to push that king back. And here we're finally on move 61, and white makes his first mistake of the game, first and only mistake of the game, on move 61. So really, really well played game for my opponent. Now I'm able to play knight f3 check, forcing off the pieces. And now I can recapture with the pawn, and now this pawn is going to promote. So in the game, we saw king f1, and I'm able to play f2, and my opponent resigned. His only legal move is to come here, and then after king g2, the pawn's going to promote. If white had gone into the corner, not f2 then, because white is stalemated. Instead, king f2, then white's only legal move is king h2, king gets out of the way, and the pawn promotes. So, after f2, my opponent resigned, and I mean, this is just wild. Opponent played a really, really great game, and I was able to play a clean game as well. Again, that's exactly the kind of chess I like to play. Simple, solid, just do your best not to blunder. And eventually, even if it takes 61 moves, your opponent will give you a chance to take the point. And I was able to capitalize. So, hope you got something out of it. I thought it was a really interesting game, kind of showcasing the French and my philosophy of chess in general. Just try to stay solid and let your opponent give you the point. Yeah, keep running those tactics, and I will hopefully have tournament recap videos coming next week sometime. Thanks for watching. Bye.